When I saw the photos of my family celebrating Christmas, which was supposedly canceled, I felt like 1,000 daggers were piercing my chest. My own son had lied to me to exclude me from the family table while secretly planning to keep everything I had built over 65 years of life. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, William's Revenge Stories, and hit the bell because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city you are watching from. My name is Arthur, and I am 65 years old, and until a few days ago, I believed I had raised an honorable son. How wrong I was. December the 24th. 2024 should have been a special date. Like every year since my grandchildren Alice and Ethan were born, we had planned to gather at my son David's house to celebrate Christmas Eve. The family tradition I valued so much those moments, where 3 generations sat around the table sharing not just dinner, but the stories that build family bonds. That morning I woke up early, as I always do. At 65, the body no longer allows sleeping in, but it does not need to either. I had everything ready. The gifts for Alice and Ethan wrapped in the same gold paper. I used since they were little a bottle of 98 Reserve wine that I had saved especially for this occasion, in the spirit of a grandfather, waiting to see his grandchildren's eyes shine when opening their gifts. Around 11 in the morning, while checking the last details of my outfit, I wanted to look impeccable for the family photos. We would surely take. My phone rang. On the screen appeared David's name, and a smile was drawn on my face. Surely he was calling to confirm some detail of the dinner, or to tell me that the kids were excited waiting for their grandfather. Dad! I heard his voice on the other end of the line, but something in his tone alerted me immediately. It was not the cheerful and expectant voice I expected to hear on Christmas Eve. He sounded distant, almost cold. "Tell me, son, is everything okay for tonight?" I asked, trying to keep the enthusiasm in my voice. "That is precisely why I am calling Dad. I have bad news." There was a pause that seemed eternal to me. Bella's mother got very sick early this morning. They had to take her to the hospital, and Bella is devastated. We have decided to cancel the Christmas dinner. I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. "How is she? Is it serious? Can I help with anything?" "No, Dad, it is not necessary. The doctors say she is going to be fine, but Bella does not want to leave her alone, and honestly, none of us have the spirit to celebrate. We hope you understand." Of course I understood. The health of a loved one must always be above any celebration. I am a man who has lived enough to know that these situations are unpredictable and that family must support each other in difficult times. Of course, son, give my best wishes to Bella and tell her that if they need anything, do not hesitate to call me. "And how are the kids taking the news?" "They are fine, Dad. A little sad, but they understand the situation." Bella explained to them that sometimes Christmas does not go as we expect. After hanging up, I stood in my living room for several minutes processing the information. The house, which moments before had been full of Christmas expectation, now felt strangely empty. The gifts waited under the tree, the bottle of wine was still on the table, and I would have to spend my first Christmas Eve alone in decades. But life has taught me to adapt. I have overcome the death of my dear wife Helen 8 years ago. I have kept my company Premier Construction afloat during economic crises, and I have raised 2 children practically alone after becoming a widower. A Christmas in solitude was not going to defeat me. I decided to prepare a simple dinner for myself. I opened the bottle of wine. After all, it made no sense to save it any longer, and I toasted mentally to Bella's mother's health and to the hope that next year we could meet again. The night passed in silence. Watching Christmas movies on television only reminded me how empty the house felt, without the laughter of Alice and Ethan, without the animated conversations we used to have during these dates. Around 10 at night, I decided to check my phone to distract myself a little. I opened Instagram, an app I had learned to use mainly to see the photos that Alice, my 12-year-old granddaughter, uploaded frequently. She had that naturalness with technology that characterizes her generation, and I enjoyed seeing her world through her young eyes. And then I saw something that changed my life forever. In Alice's Instagram story, published just 2 hours earlier, appeared a photo that made the world stop around me. The photograph that appeared on my phone screen was like receiving an icy slap right in the face. There was my entire family smiling around a perfectly decorated Christmas table, with plates already served and glasses raised in a toast. David was wearing the red sweater I had given him the previous year. Bella looked radiant without any sign of the anguish she should supposedly feel for her sick mother. Christine, my daughter, was hugging her nephews, and Robert was holding a glass of champagne with a festive expression. But what impacted me most was seeing Bella's own mother, Mrs. Mary, sitting comfortably at the head of the table with a flushed face and a wide smile, clearly enjoying the evening. The same woman who was supposedly so sick that she had ruined our Christmas plans looked healthier than ever. Alice's caption said the best Christmas Eve with the whole family gathered. Grandma Mary told us hilarious stories. Complete, family, perfect Christmas. My hands began to tremble. I read the text 1, 2, 3 times, hoping my eyes were deceiving me. But there was no possible error. The date and time were clearly marked. December the 24th, 8:45 at night. Exactly the time I was eating dinner alone, believing my family was at a hospital, accompanying an imaginary sick person. I got up from the armchair so abruptly that I spilled the rest of the wine on the carpet. The red liquid spread like a bloodstain, creating a puddle that seemed to symbolize perfectly what I was feeling at that moment. They had destroyed something inside me with the same brutality with which the wine had stained the fabric. I looked at the photograph again this time, analyzing every detail with the thoroughness of a detective. The table was set for exactly 8 people. I counted every chair, every plate, every glass 8 places, the exact amount we would have been if I had been present. But clearly they had calculated the gathering without including me from the beginning. I observed the Christmas decoration in the background. I immediately recognized David's tree. It was the same one we had chosen together 3 weeks ago at the Christmas market downtown. I had insisted on accompanying him because I wanted to make sure it was big enough for the grandkids to place all their favorite ornaments. I had paid half the cost, as I did every year, because I considered contributing to my children's Christmas decoration was part of my responsibilities as a father. The golden lights framing the scene were the same ones I had seen at David's house the week before, when I went to drop off gifts early. Bella had proudly shown me how they looked, telling me she was excited about the family dinner we would have. It is going to be the most beautiful Christmas we have ever had. She had told me with a smile that now, in retrospect, seemed loaded with a cruelty I did not know how to interpret at the time. I zoomed in on the image to examine the expressions on each face. David looked completely relaxed, with no trace of the worry he had feigned during our phone conversation. His eyes shone with genuine joy, not with the sadness of someone whose mother-in-law is hospitalized. Bella, for her part, showed that expression of satisfaction she adopts when things go exactly as she plans. But it was the faces of my grandchildren that hurt me the most. Alice and Ethan seemed to be having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to the deception that had been orchestrated at my expense. On their faces there was not a shred of the melancholy that children should show who just found out their grandfather could not join them on Christmas Eve due to a family emergency. I swiped my finger across the screen to see if there was more content in Alice's story. I found a short video where Grandma Mary's voice was heard in the background, telling a joke while everyone laughed out loud. The woman who was supposedly fighting for her life in a hospital bed was narrating anecdotes with the vitality of someone in perfect health conditions. My brain was working at full speed, trying to process not only what I saw, but the implications of it all. This had not been an impulsive decision made due to a medical emergency. This had been a planned, deliberate, and carefully executed exclusion. Someone had made the conscious decision to eliminate me from the Christmas equation, and everyone else had agreed. I searched Christine's profile to see if she had posted something similar. Indeed, I found a group photo where everyone appeared toasting with the comment, "Christmas with family." The best moments are the ones we spend together. The irony of those words hit me like a hammer. Together? Together without me? Robert had also shared an image in his stories, a photograph of empty plates, after dinner with the text, "Incredible Christmas dinner. Thank you, David and Bella, for hosting us in your home." Not a single mention of my absence, nor a comment on how strange it was to celebrate without the patriarch of the family. I sat down again, but this time my posture was completely different. I was no longer the resigned man who had accepted a change of plans due to unforeseen circumstances. Now I was someone who had just discovered a betrayal that transcended anything I had experienced before in my 65 years of life. The humiliation burned inside me like acid. Not only had they lied to me blatantly, but they had celebrated my absence. Even worse, they had documented their deception on social media as if it were something to be proud of, as if my exclusion had improved the quality of their celebration. I closed my eyes and tried to remember every word of the phone conversation with David. His tone, his pauses, the way he had constructed the lie. "That is precisely why I'm calling Dad. I have bad news." The phrase now resonated in my mind with a sinister quality I had not perceived at the moment. I realized that he had probably been practicing that conversation, preparing every word to sound convincing. Perhaps Bella had been by his side, guiding him on what to say to make sure I did not suspect anything. The question that began to torment me was why? What had I done to deserve such cruelty? At what point had I become someone whose presence was so unwanted that they preferred to invent a medical emergency rather than include me in their celebration? But while those questions consumed me, something deeper began to emerge from within me. A cold and calculating determination I had not felt since the hardest days of building my company. If they had decided to play dirty with me, they were about to discover that I also knew how to do it. That night, I could not sleep. I remained awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, while my mind began to review the last few months with a clarity that terrified me. It was as if someone had turned on a bright light in a dark room, revealing details I had previously overlooked or interpreted benignly. I remembered the conversation I had with David 3 weeks ago when we went together to buy the Christmas tree. While we walked among the market stalls, he had mentioned something that, at that moment, seemed like a casual reflection on the family economy. Dad, Bella, and I have been talking about optimizing expenses. With inflation so high, we all have to be more careful with money, he had told me, while examining a particularly leafy fir tree. I had responded automatically, as I always did when my children expressed financial concerns. "If you need help, you know you can count on me. That is what I am here for." But then he had added something that now, under this new perspective, acquired a completely different meaning. "No, Dad, it is not about that. It is about the fact that everyone, including you, should reconsider certain traditions that are costly and unnecessary." At that moment, I interpreted his words as a sign of financial maturity. I thought David was developing a more responsible mindset about money, but now I understood he was suggesting that my participation in family celebrations represented an unnecessary expense. I continued unraveling the skein of memories. The week before the Christmas deception, Bella had made an unexpected visit to my house. She said she wanted to chat for a while, which surprised me because normally our conversations were limited to cordial exchanges during family gatherings. She sat on my sofa with a cup of coffee and began talking about the importance of each generation having its own space. Her exact words had been, "Arthur, I think it is wonderful how you have always been so present in our lives. But David and I are thinking that perhaps the time has come to create our own family traditions." I had nodded understandingly, thinking she referred to the natural process of independence that all young couples experience. I had even told her that I thought it was very healthy that they wanted to establish their own identity as a core family. But then she had continued. For example, Christmas celebrations could be more intimate if they were just parents and children, without the pressure of including the entire extended family. Extended family. That expression had seemed curious to me at that moment, but I had let it pass. Now I realized that Bella had been referring to me as extended family, placing me in the same category as distant uncles or cousins seen once a year. The manipulation had been so subtle I did not detect it. Bella had been preparing the ground, sowing the idea of my exclusion gradually, so that when the moment came, it would seem like a natural evolution and not a cruel decision. I also remembered a phone conversation I had with Christine 2 days before Christmas Eve. My daughter had called me to confirm dinner times, but there was something strange in her way of speaking. She seemed to be choosing her words very carefully, as if she were following a script. "Dad, are you very excited about Christmas Eve dinner?" she had asked me. Of course, as always, I already have the gifts ready for the kids. And yes, well, she had interrupted me abruptly. "Let us hope everything goes according to plan." At that moment, I thought she referred to the typical pre-Christmas nerves we all experience when organizing family gatherings. But now I understood that Christine already knew what was going to happen. She was already aware of the plan to exclude me, and that call had been her clumsy way of dealing with anticipated guilt. My son David had also shown strange behaviors during those previous weeks. He had visited my house more frequently than usual, but his conversations always drifted toward the same topic: the beach apartment in Florida that I had bought 10 years ago as an investment, and that he considered part of his future inheritance. "Dad, have you thought about formalizing the transfer of the Florida property? It would be simpler for tax purposes if it were already in my name," he had suggested during one of those visits. I had explained to him that I preferred to keep all my assets under my control while I was alive, but that obviously he and Christine would inherit everything when the time came. David had insisted several times, arguing legal and financial advantages. That frankly did not convince me. "There is no rush, son, when it is necessary. We will do it," I had answered each time. Now I understood that those conversations had not been casual. David had been testing the waters, probably following Bella's advice, to ensure his access to my properties and my resistance to transfer ownership. Immediately had probably been interpreted as a sign that I needed to be convinced through other methods. The missing piece of the puzzle was revealed when I remembered a conversation I had partially overheard a month ago. I had arrived early at David's house to pick up some documents he had reviewed for my company and found the door ajar. Voices filtered from the kitchen into the garden. "He cannot keep controlling our decisions forever," David had answered. "Your father already lived his life. Now we have the right to live ours without his constant interference." At that moment I had coughed to announce my presence, and the voices had fallen silent immediately. When I entered, both received me with perfect smiles, as if they had been discussing the dinner menu. Now those words took on a sinister meaning. It was not just about generational independence. It was about systematically eliminating me from their lives, to be able to make decisions without my interference, and probably to access my resources without having to ask me for permission or explanations. The Christmas humiliation had not been an impulsive act. It had been the result of weeks, perhaps months of planning, a strategy carefully designed to begin erasing me from their family life, starting with the most significant celebrations. But while I processed all this information, something else began to crystallize in my mind. If they had been so meticulous in planning my exclusion, surely they had also been preparing other moves. And if I knew my son well, I knew exactly where to start looking. I got up from bed with a determination I had not felt in years. It was time to stop being the victim of this situation and become the architect of the consequences they were about to face. At 4 a.m, I went down to my study, turned on the desk lamp, and began the most important investigation of my life. For 40 years, I had built premier construction from scratch, and that experience had taught me that when something does not add up in numbers or business relationships, there are always documents that reveal the truth. The first thing I checked were the company files. David had held the position of administrator for 3 years, a role I had given him to gradually prepare him to inherit the business. He had access to accounts contracts and all the company's financial documentation. I opened the accounting system and began reviewing transactions from the last 6 months. At first, everything seemed normal. Payments to suppliers, invoices from clients, routine operating expenses. But when I reached the miscellaneous expenses section, I found something that made my blood run cold. There were 3 invoices from Suncoast Realty for real estate appraisal services, each for an amount of $250. The dates were significant: October, November, and December 2024. David had been paying for professional evaluations of my apartment in Florida using company funds, but the most revealing thing was the description of the service on each invoice. Appraisal for real estate sale apartment, Ocean Drive, 247, Florida. It was not an appraisal for insurance or to update accounting records. It was specifically for a sale. I searched David's physical files, the ones he kept in the locked drawer of his desk in the company office. I kept the master keys to all office furniture, a security practice I had implemented since the early years of the company's operation. Inside the drawer, I found a folder labeled Confidential Personal Project. My heart began to beat wildly as I opened it. The content exceeded my worst expectations. The first document was a preliminary sales contract for the Florida apartment, dated December 15th. Just 9 days before the Christmas farce. The buyer was an investment company called Mediterranean Properties, and the agreed price was $420,000. David had signed as the authorized representative of the owner, but I had never signed any power of attorney granting him that representation. I reviewed every page of the contract, looking for my signature or some document that legitimized his actions, but I found nothing. David had forged my authorization or had found some legal way to present himself as my representative without my knowledge. The second document was even more disturbing. It was a letter addressed to a law firm specializing in inheritance law, requesting information on procedures to accelerate asset transfers in cases of elderly owners with signs of cognitive deterioration. I read that phrase several times to make sure I had understood correctly. My own son was exploring the possibility of declaring me mentally incompetent to be able to access my assets without my consent. The betrayal had reached levels I never imagined possible. The law firm's response was stapled to the original inquiry. The lawyer explained that to initiate such procedures, independent medical evaluations demonstrating real incapacity testimonies from close relatives and a judicial process that could last between 6 months and 2 years were required. In the margins of the letter, David had made handwritten notes. Christine must testify. Document forgetfulness and confusion. Trusted doctor? My daughter was also involved in this conspiracy. The revelation hit me like a punch in the stomach. Christine, my princess, the girl I had cared for when she was sick as a child, whom I had supported during her divorce, whom I had helped financially when Robert lost his job 2 years ago. She too had decided to betray me for money. I continued reviewing the documents. I found a detailed plan for the distribution of my assets once they obtained legal control over them. The Florida apartment would be sold immediately to divide the money between David and Christine. The company Premier Construction would be sold to a competitor who had shown interest in buying it. My family home would be put up for rent to generate passive income, and I, according to their calculations, would be committed to a mid-range nursing home, which would cost approximately $2,000 a month. They had investigated 3 different options and had marked their preferences according to the cost-benefit ratio. The coldness of their calculations nauseated me. It was not just that they planned to rob me. They had done it with the efficiency of a commercial operation. They had quantified my life. They had put a price on my freedom, and they had decided that my well-being was an expense they could minimize to maximize their profits. The last document in the folder was the most personal and the most painful. It was a letter David had written, but not sent, addressed to a friend of his who worked in real estate. In it, he described his complicated family situation and explained why he needed to accelerate certain financial processes. My father is becoming increasingly stubborn and controlling, David had written. He refuses to transfer properties that legally should already be in our hands, and his constant presence in our family decisions is affecting the harmony of my marriage. Bella is tired of having to consult every decision with him, and honestly, I am too. The letter continued. We have decided to take distance, gradually starting with family celebrations. If he feels excluded, perhaps he will understand that it is time to take the next step and formalize the asset transfers. It is a bit of a harsh strategy, but sometimes parents need clear incentives to accept that their time of control has ended. Those words were like receiving a stab directly to the heart. The Christmas exclusion had not been just gratuitous cruelty. It had been a psychological pressure tactic designed to break my resistance and force me to hand over my assets. They wanted to make me feel so alone and vulnerable that I would accede to their demands to regain their affection, but they had made a fatal error in underestimating me. For 65 years I had faced challenges that would have destroyed weaker men. I had built a successful business. I had raised 2 children practically alone after being widowed. I had overcome economic and personal crises that would have defeated anyone. If they thought a Christmas humiliation and some fraudulent documents were going to break me, they were gravely mistaken. The time had come to show them that old Arthur still had many cards to play. I photographed every document with my phone, meticulously stored the evidence in its original places, and closed the drawer. Then I returned home as the dawn began to dye the Chicago sky with golden tones. I had exactly what I needed to begin my counterattack. And when David received the first unexpected call, he would begin to understand that he had awakened the wrong enemy. At 7 in the morning on December the 25th, while David probably slept peacefully after his perfect Christmas celebration, I was already showered, shaved, and dressed in my best suit. I had made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever, and I did not intend to waste another minute in regrets. My first move was to call Anthony my trusted lawyer for more than 20 years. Anthony had handled all the important legal matters of my life: the expansion of Premier Construction, the purchase of properties, the will after Helen's death, and multiple commercial contracts that had been crucial to my company's success. Anthony, I know it is Christmas, but I need to see you, urgently, I told him as soon as he answered the phone. Arthur, what is wrong? Your voice sounds different, he replied with the concern of someone who has known a person for decades. I prefer to explain it in person. Can you see me at your office in an hour? Of course, I will be there in 45 minutes. While I drove toward downtown Chicago, I mentally reviewed the strategy I had been formulating since dawn. It was not about acting impulsively out of revenge. It was necessary to execute a meticulous plan that protected my interests and sent a clear message about the consequences of betraying my trust. Anthony's office was located in a historic building near the plaza. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me with fresh coffee, and that serious expression he adopted when he sensed complicated matters were coming. Tell me everything, he said after pouring me a cup. I related the events of the last 24 hours, David's lie, the discovery of the photos on Instagram, and especially the documents I had found in his office during the early morning. Anthony listened in silence, occasionally taking notes, and his expression became graver as my story progressed. Arthur, this is much more serious than I thought when you called me, he said finally. The documents you describe constitute document fraud and possibly swindling. David has forged your authorization to negotiate the sale of a property that does not belong to him, That is exactly what I thought. What are my legal options? Anthony leaned back in his chair and interlaced his fingers, adopting that reflective posture I knew well. We have several alternatives. We can file a criminal complaint for document forgery and fraud, which could result in criminal charges against David. We can also initiate civil actions to annul any contract he has signed without your authorization and claim damages. And regarding protecting my properties? That is more immediate. We can file a request for precautionary measures today to block any transaction related to your assets. I also recommend that we immediately change David's access conditions to the company accounts. I showed him the photographs I had taken of all the documents. Anthony examined them with the meticulousness of a surgeon zooming in on details on my phone screen and making additional notes. This is sufficient evidence to act immediately, he concluded. But before proceeding, I need to ask you something important. Are you sure you want to follow this path? Once we initiate legal actions against David, the family relationship will be irreparably damaged. His question made me reflect for a few seconds. I thought about all the years shared with David, the happy moments of his childhood, the pride I had felt when he graduated from college, the hopes I had placed in him as successor to the family business. But then I remembered the coldness of his calculations, the letter where he described my stubbornness as a problem to be solved, and especially the deliberate humiliation of Christmas Eve. David had crossed a line that had no return. Anthony, my son, already destroyed the family relationship when he decided to treat me as an obstacle to his economic ambitions. I am only going to defend what belongs to me by right. Understood. Then let us proceed systematically. During the next 3 hours, we worked on developing a comprehensive legal plan. The first step was to immediately contact Suncoast Realty to inform them that any transaction related to my apartment in Florida was fraudulent and that David had no authorization to represent me. Anthony made the call while I listened. The conversation was brief but effective. The real estate agent confirmed that indeed they had been working with David on the appraisal and possible sale of the apartment, believing he acted with full legal powers. When Anthony explained the real situation, they committed to suspending any activity related to the property immediately. The second step was more complex. We needed to formally revoke all administrative privileges David had at Premier Construction. This included access to bank accounts, authorization to sign contracts, and his salary as company administrator. How much does David earn monthly for his work at the company? Anthony asked while drafting the documents. $1,500, fixed plus quarterly bonuses that can reach another $500, depending on results. So we are talking about approximately $20,000 annually that he is going to lose. Exactly. And that is without counting additional benefits. Use of the company car, private health insurance, and commissions for special projects. The third step was the most dramatic. We decided to put the Florida apartment up for immediate sale, but this time through a different real estate agency and with a price slightly higher than what David had secretly negotiated. I wanted him to find out about the sale in the most shocking way possible. Do you have any preference on how to handle communication with David? Anthony asked me. I want him to find out from the real estate agency, not from me. When he receives that call, he will know immediately that I have discovered his plans. Anthony smiled for the first time all morning. A psychologically effective approach. The impact will be maximum. I signed all the necessary documents. The revocation of business powers, the authorization for the real estate sale, and instructions to block any fraudulent transaction. We also updated my will, eliminating the clauses that especially favored David and establishing stricter conditions for any future inheritance. When I left Anthony's office at noon, I felt like a general who had just planned the perfect strategy for a decisive battle. The legal mechanisms were in motion, communications had been sent, and now all that remained was to wait for David to receive the first call that would make him understand the magnitude of his error. While I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was a WhatsApp message from David. Dad, I hope you had a quiet Christmas. I will call later to see how you are. The hypocrisy of that message caused me a mixture of indignation and satisfaction. In a few hours, David would discover that his quiet father had turned out to be much more dangerous than he ever imagined. I did not have to wait long for my strategy to begin bearing fruit. At 3:15 in the afternoon on December the 25th, while enjoying a late lunch in the quiet of my dining room, my phone rang. On the screen appeared David's name, but this time it was not a casual call full of false courtesies. Dad, are you there? His voice sounded altered, almost frantic. It was completely different from the controlled and calculating tone he had used the day before to lie to me about the Christmas dinner. Yes, David, I hear you perfectly. I responded with a deliberate calm that contrasted dramatically with his evident nervousness. Dad, I just received a very strange call from a real estate agency. They told me the Florida apartment is for sale. It must be a mistake, right? Some kind of administrative confusion? The desperation in his voice was palpable. I could imagine him pacing back and forth in his living room, probably under Bella's worried gaze, trying to find a logical explanation for something that completely defied his secret plans. There is no mistake, David. The apartment is effectively for sale. The silence that followed my response lasted several seconds. I could hear his agitated breathing on the other end of the line, processing the implications of what I had just confirmed to him. But, Dad, why did you not tell me anything? I thought we had agreed that property, eventually... Eventually what, David? I interrupted him with a tone I had never used with him before. Eventually it would be yours without my consent. Eventually you could sell it using forged documents. Another silence, but this time more prolonged and much heavier. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. He was no longer the desperate son trying to understand a confusing situation. He was the conspirator who had just realized he had been discovered. Dad, I think we should talk in person. I am heading to your house right now. Of course, David. I will be waiting for you. I hung up the phone and headed to my living room window that faced the street. I wanted to see his arrival, observe his body language, study every detail of his behavior when he thought I was not looking. For 40 years building a company, I had learned that people's first reactions to crises reveal their true character. 20 minutes later, David's silver Mercedes stopped in front of my house, with an abruptness that clearly indicated his mental state. I saw him get out of the vehicle with quick, nervous movements, close the door harder than necessary, and walk toward my entrance with determined but irregular steps. When I opened the door before he had a chance to ring the bell, his expression confirmed everything I needed to know. His eyes showed a mixture of panic guilt and something I took a moment to identify. Anger. It was not just the desperation of someone who had been discovered doing something wrong. It was the fury of someone who feels betrayed for having lost something they considered theirs by right. Dad, we have to talk seriously, he said without greeting me, walking directly into my living room, as if he were the owner of the house. Go ahead, David. Sit down and explain to me exactly what you want to talk about. He dropped onto the sofa with a heaviness that betrayed the emotional load he was carrying. For a few seconds he stared at his hands, as if he were mentally organizing the arguments he was going to present. Dad, I know you probably found some documents at the office. He began surprisingly opting for a partial confession, instead of continuing to deny everything. Some documents I repeated slowly. It is a very soft way to describe forged sales contracts and legal inquiries about how to declare me mentally incompetent. His face turned pale when I specifically mentioned the issue of mental incompetence. Evidently, he did not expect I had discovered that particular part of his plan. Dad, that is not what it looks like. I was just exploring options, trying to understand what our legal rights were as a family. Our rights? My voice rose for the first time in the conversation. Since when do you have the right to sell properties that do not belong to you? Since when do you have the right to declare me incompetent to appropriate my assets? David sat up on the sofa and, for the first time since his arrival, looked me directly in the eyes. What I saw there surprised me. There was no longer a trace of guilt or desperation. It had been replaced by a cold determination I had never seen in him before. Dad, let us be honest. You are 65 years old. Mom died 8 years ago, and since then you have been increasingly isolated, more stubborn, more difficult to handle. Difficult to handle? The expression struck me as particularly offensive. Yes, Dad. Bella and I have been trying to be patient, but your behavior is affecting our marriage, our family decisions, even our finances. You need help managing your affairs, and if you cannot acknowledge it voluntarily. So you decided to deceive me about Christmas dinner, to make me feel excluded and vulnerable. I finished the sentence for him. David remained silent, but his silence was more revealing than any verbal confession. In his eyes, I could see the exact moment he made a crucial decision to stop pretending regret and show his true intentions. Dad, the Christmas exclusion was Bella's idea, but after reflecting, I think she was right. We needed space to discuss our future as a nuclear family, without your constant supervision. And did you reach interesting conclusions during that discussion? We reached the conclusion that it is time for you to make mature decisions about your estate. The Florida apartment should have been in my name years ago. The company should have a clear ownership structure, and you should consider housing options more appropriate for your age. His words were like stabs, but what impacted me most was the coldness with which he pronounced them. This was not the son I had raised, the young man I had taught values of honesty and respect. This was a stranger who had coldly calculated how to strip me of everything I had built in life. I see, I said finally. So it is not about an error of judgment or a moment of weakness. It is about a deliberate strategy to appropriate my assets. It is about a natural generational transition that you have refused to acknowledge. I got up from the armchair and walked to the window, turning my back to him while I processed the magnitude of his betrayal. When I turned back to him, I had made my own crucial decision. David, you're right about one thing. It is time to make mature decisions about my estate. And the first mature decision I have taken is to ensure that neither you nor anyone else ever manipulates or deceives me again to get what does not belong to them. The expression on his face changed when he understood that my tone had acquired a finality that admitted no negotiation. What does that mean exactly, Dad? It means you are about to learn the real consequences of betraying the wrong person. The threat implicit in my words provoked an immediate reaction in David. He stood up abruptly with clenched fists, and an expression revealing years of accumulated resentment that until that moment he had kept hidden behind a facade of filial respect. Consequences? Are you threatening me, Dad? His voice had acquired a defiant tone he had never used with me, because if so, maybe it is time you know some truths. We have been keeping quiet out of respect. I am listening, David. I am very interested in knowing those truths. He approached me until he was less than a yard away, as if physical proximity could give him a psychological advantage in the confrontation that was escalating rapidly. The truth is that Bella cannot deal with you anymore. Every time we organize something family-related, we have to consult. You ask for permission, adapt our plans to your schedules and preferences. Every important decision about our children, about our house, about our future, requires your approval, because economically, we depend on you. No one forced you to accept my financial help, David. Financial help? He laughed bitterly. Dad, you do not help, you control. Every dollar you give us comes with implicit conditions. Every economic favor becomes an emotional debt we never finish paying. His words hurt me more than I was willing to admit, because they contained a grain of truth I had preferred to ignore. Perhaps my generosity had indeed come accompanied by expectations of gratitude and deference I had never explicitly expressed. And the solution you found was to lie to me, exclude me, and plan to rob me? It is not stealing, he shouted, losing his composure completely. Those assets are going to be ours eventually. We were just trying to accelerate a process you insist on delaying out of pure selfishness. Selfishness? Is it selfishness to want to maintain control over what I have worked for all my life? Yes, when that control is destroying our lives. David began walking in circles around my living room, gesturing broadly while releasing years of repressed frustration. Do you know what it is like to have to explain to my wife why we cannot make decisions about our own home without consulting my father? Do you know how humiliating it is for a 38-year-old man to have to ask for permission to make renovations in his house because technically it belongs to his father? I never stopped you from making renovations in your house because it is not my house. It is yours. I lend it to you. The Florida apartment is yours. You promised it to me. The company is yours where I work as an employee. Even the car I drive is in your name. When exactly was I going to become an independent adult in this family? For the first time since this confrontation had begun, David had touched a point that made me reflect. I had built a system where my children depended completely on my benevolence, and perhaps that dependence had generated resentments I had never considered. But my moment of introspection lasted little because David continued speaking, and his next words eliminated any vestige of understanding I could have developed toward his position. Bella made me see that, as long as you continued controlling everything, we could never build a life truly ours. That is why we decided to take the reins of our future. Bella made you see? I repeated slowly. Was this Bella's idea? Bella is an intelligent woman who helped me understand that filial respect cannot become an eternal mission. She showed me there are legal ways to accelerate asset transfers when the owner shows reluctance to recognize the needs of the next generation. Are you referring to declaring me mentally incompetent? David stopped dead, as if he had forgotten I had discovered that specific part of his plan. For a few seconds he seemed to look for a justification that sounded reasonable, but finally opted for brutal honesty. Dad, let us be realistic. You are 65, you live alone, you go out. Less and less, your cultural references are outdated, and your economic decisions are increasingly conservative and fearful. It would not be difficult to argue that you need professional supervision to manage such a considerable estate. The clinical coldness with which he described my supposed mental decay produced a mixture of horror and fascination in me. This was my son, the baby I had cared for during nights when he had a fever, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the young man I had supported during his college studies, and now he was analyzing my mental capacity as if it were a clinical case. And what role does Christine play in all this? Christine understands the situation. She also has her own economic needs, her own plans for the future. It is not fair that our lives are permanently on pause, waiting for you to decide when it is the appropriate time to yield us what will eventually be ours anyway. So she also agrees with declaring me incompetent. David hesitated before answering, which gave me the answer I needed. Christine prefers less confrontational options, but understands that if you do not cooperate voluntarily, we might be forced to seek legal alternatives. I see. So, the Christmas exclusion was just the first step of a broader strategy. It was a way to make you understand that your constant presence in our family decisions was becoming problematic. We thought if you experienced a little loneliness, perhaps you would recognize it is time to take steps toward greater generational independence. Generational independence. The expression seemed particularly cynical to me. Is that what you call planned theft? It is not theft, he shouted again. It is justice. I have worked in your company for 3 years. I have taken care of you since Mom died. I have been the perfect son you always expected. And in exchange for all that, I have the right to something more than vague promises about future inheritances. His words finally revealed the heart of his resentment. It was not just about economic ambition. It was about a man who felt scammed for having invested years of his life being the perfect son without receiving what he considered adequate compensation. David. No one forced you to work in my company. No one forced you to care for me. If you did it expecting specific rewards, you should have communicated it to me clearly instead of planning to betray me behind my back. Betray you? His voice turned sarcastic. Dad, you betrayed us first when you decided to keep us in a state of permanent dependence, while pretending you were preparing us for independence. The conversation had reached a point of no return. We were no longer arguing about methods or misunderstandings. We were confronting fundamentally different visions about family money and loyalty. I headed to my desk and took out a folder I had prepared before his arrival. It contained copies of all the legal documents I had signed that morning with Anthony. David, since we have reached this level of brutal sincerity, it is time you know the real consequences of your decisions. When he saw the folder in my hands, his expression changed. For the first time since his diatribe had begun, he seemed to remember that I also had cards to play in this game. I opened the folder, slowly enjoying the moment of tension that had been created. David had gone from defensive arrogance to a nervous caution, indicating he was finally understanding I was not the helpless victim he had imagined. The first document you are going to recognize, I said, while extracting a sheet with official letterhead, is the immediate revocation of all your administrative privileges at Premier Construction. From this moment on, you no longer have access to the company. Bank accounts, you cannot sign contracts in my name, and your monthly salary of $1,500 is suspended indefinitely. The color disappeared completely from his face. David approached and tried to take the document from my hands, but I kept it out of his reach. That you cannot do legally, he murmured with a trembling voice. I have an employment contract labor rights. You have a contract that specifically includes termination clauses for conduct incompatible with company interests. Forging documents to sell owner properties definitely qualifies as incompatible conduct. I took out the second document, a copy of the fraudulent sales contract he had signed with Mediterranean Properties. This is the contract where you present yourself as my authorized representative to sell the Florida apartment for $420,000. Could you explain to me when exactly I granted you that representation? David dropped onto the sofa as if his legs had lost the capacity to support him. His hands trembled visibly as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. Dad, that was just a preliminary exploration. I would never have completed the sale without your final consent. Really? I took out the third document. Then I suppose this bank transfer of $5,000 you made as a security deposit was also just explorative. David opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The evidence was irrefutable, and we both knew it. But that is not all. I continued extracting the fourth document. This is a complete report of all the steps you have taken during the last 6 months, using company resources for your personal plans. 3 real estate appraisals, legal inquiries about mental incompetence, and even meetings with potential buyers, all paid with Premier Construction money. Dad, please let me explain. There is nothing to explain, David. The numbers speak for themselves. I took a calculator from my desk. 3 appraisals at $250 each is $750. Legal inquiries add another $1,200. Representation expenses with potential buyers, another $800. In total, you have embezzled $2,750 of business funds to finance your personal conspiracy. David put his hands to his head as if the weight of the figures were physically overwhelming. But that is not all, I continued relentlessly. The 5th document is a formal complaint for document forgery and fraud that my lawyer will file tomorrow in court if we do not reach an immediate agreement. An agreement? He asked with a thread of hope in his voice. Yes, an agreement that recognizes the reality of what you have done and establishes the appropriate consequences. I sat in front of him, adopting the posture I used during the most important business negotiations of my career. The conditions are as follows. First, you immediately resign from all positions at Premier Construction and return all company assets in your possession, including the car, the mobile phone, and corporate credit cards. David nodded weakly like a prisoner accepting his sentence. Second, the Florida apartment will be sold immediately, but the funds will be allocated to an investment account that I will control exclusively. They will never be part of your inheritance. Dad, that is unfair, I interrupted him. Does it seem unfair to you that someone loses access to a property they tried to steal? Third, I continued without waiting for his response, the monthly allowance I gave you for family expenses is permanently canceled. The $1,000 monthly you received, besides your salary, will no longer exist. How are we going to live without that income? He asked with genuine desperation. The same way any 38-year-old adult lives working. You have university training experience in construction and contacts in the sector. It is time you demonstrate that independence you claimed so much. I took out the final document from the folder. Fourth, and this is the most important, you will sign a legal waiver to any claim on my assets while I'm alive. You will not inherit the company. You will not inherit properties. You will not have access to any economic benefit derived from our family relationship. David stood up abruptly from the sofa. That is too much. I am your son. I have rights. Rights are lost when betrayals are committed. You chose to treat me as an obstacle to your economic ambitions. Now you will live the consequences of that choice. And if I refuse to sign, my smile was cold and calculating. If you refuse tomorrow, you will face criminal charges for document forgery fraud and embezzlement of business funds. With the evidence I have, you could face between 2 and 5 years in prison, plus the obligation to restitute all economic damages. David remained silent for several minutes, looking alternately at the documents and my implacable face. Finally, he seemed to understand he had no real options. And what happens with my children? With Alice and Ethan, are you also going to punish them for my mistakes? It was the first time in the entire confrontation he mentioned his children, and that hurt me more than I expected. But I had already made my decision. Your children will learn a valuable lesson, that actions have consequences, and that family betrayal has a price paid over generations. David sat down again, defeated. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Is there any way you might reconsider this decision in the future? David, you yourself taught me something very valuable during this conversation. You told me Bella made you see I was an obstacle to your happiness. Now I have decided to eliminate that obstacle in the most efficient way possible, eliminating you from my life. I extended a pen and pointed to the documents. Sign, David, and then get out of my house forever. David remained motionless for several minutes, looking at the pen in my hand as if it were a torture instrument. His lips moved slightly as if he were having a mental conversation weighing options he probably already knew he did not have. Finally, he took the pen with trembling hands and began signing the documents one by one. Each signature seemed to extract vital energy from him, as if he were renouncing not just economic benefits, but his own identity as my heir. Dad, he murmured while signing the last document, can we ever fix this? David, when you planned to declare me mentally incompetent, did you think about whether that relationship could be fixed someday? He did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. Once the signatures were completed, I collected all the documents and put them in the folder. David remained seated, as if he did not know what to do next, as if he had lost the capacity to make independent decisions. You have until Friday to deliver the company car, the office keys, and any other corporate asset in your possession, I told him, as I headed toward the entrance door. Friday? But that is in 4 days. I need time to reorganize my life, look for work. You had time to plan my ruin for months? 4 days is more generosity than you deserve. David got up slowly from the sofa and walked toward the exit with hesitant steps. At the door, he stopped and turned toward me with an expression mixing defeat with something resembling resentment. "You know Bella is not going to accept this quietly," he said as a last attempt at intimidation. "Bella can do whatever she considers convenient, but I suggest you explain clearly to her that legal actions are completely documented and that any attempt at retaliation will only worsen her situation." When he finally left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the emotional weight of what had just happened. I had won the battle, but the personal cost was higher than I had anticipated. My phone rang 20 minutes later. The name on the screen was Christine. Dad David just called me crying. He told me you have completely lost your mind and fired him from the company. What is going on? The concern in her voice seemed genuine, but after the discoveries of the last few days, I could no longer trust appearances. "Christine, did you know your brother was planning to sell my apartment without my authorization?" There was a prolonged pause before she answered. "Dad, I think David was exploring options to help you manage your properties better. Did you know he had consulted with lawyers about how to declare me mentally incompetent?" Another pause longer this time. "Dad, those were just informative inquiries. No one wanted to hurt you. We were just worried about your future well-being." The word "we" confirmed what I already suspected. Christine had also been involved in the family conspiracy. "Christine, I need to see you. Come home now. Dad, I cannot, right now. The kids are with their activities, and Robert is not home. Perhaps tomorrow we can—" "It is not an invitation, Christine. It is a mandatory appointment. If you do not come voluntarily, my next call will be Anthony to include you in the legal actions I have initiated against David." "Legal actions? Dad, what are you talking about?" "Come and you will know. You have an hour." I hung up before she could respond. While I waited for Christine's arrival, I prepared a second folder with documents related to the economic benefits she had received during the last few years. The list was extensive: help for the purchase of her current house, interest-free loans for family vacations, payments for her children's private education, and the monthly allowance of $800 she received as family aid. I also included copies of WhatsApp messages she had exchanged with David during the last few weeks, where strategies to handle my stubbornness regarding asset transfers were discussed. Christine arrived exactly an hour later, accompanied by Robert. Her presence surprised me, but it also confirmed she had perceived the gravity of the situation and had brought emotional reinforcements. Dad David told us his version of what happened. Christine began before even sitting down. "I think there are serious misunderstandings we can clear up if we talk calmly." "There are no misunderstandings, Christine. There is documented family betrayal." I showed her the folder I had prepared for her. Her expression changed when she saw her name on the cover. "What is that?" "It is your personal dossier of participation in the conspiracy against me." Robert, who until that moment had remained silent, intervened with a conciliatory tone. "Arthur, I think you are interpreting some family conversations wrong. No one wanted to betray you. We only wanted to help you make decisions more appropriate for your age." "Decisions more appropriate for my age?" I repeated the phrase slowly. "Like declaring me mentally incompetent to access my assets?" Christine turned pale. "Dad, that was never a real option. We were just investigating what legal alternatives existed for hypothetical cases." "Hypothetical cases?" I opened her folder and extracted the first document. "This is a message from you to David on December 15th, where you say textually Dad is increasingly isolated and stubborn. Perhaps it is time to consider the legal option we discussed. Does that seem hypothetical to you?" Christine looked at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "Dad, that message is taken out of context." "Then contextualize it. Explain to me in what context it is appropriate for my children to discuss declaring me incompetent." Neither Christine nor Robert could answer that question. The difference between you and David is that he at least had the courage to admit his intentions when I confronted him. You continue lying even when I show you the evidence. Christine began to cry, but her tears no longer moved me as before. During the last 24 hours, I had learned that my children were capable of manipulating even their emotions to get what they wanted. Dad, please, we are your family. Can we fix this? Christine, you already fixed this when you decided to exclude me from your family life, to be able to plan my future without my participation. Now I am fixing the consequences of that decision. The following days were a whirlwind of activity that kept me busy, and surprisingly, it provided me with a sense of purpose I had not experienced in years. On Friday morning, just as I had ordered, David arrived at the Premier Construction offices to hand over the keys, the company car and all corporate elements in his possession. I observed him from my office window while he performed the handover with my new administrative assistant, a young man named Mark, whom I had hired on Wednesday. David looked haggard. He had visibly lost weight in just 4 days, and his movements lacked the confidence that had always characterized his presence. During that same week, the Florida apartment received 3 purchase offers, all superior to the $420,000 David had secretly negotiated. The best offer reached $460,000, a difference of $40,000 that clearly demonstrated my son's plans were not only treacherous, but also incompetent from a commercial point of view. I accepted the best offer and scheduled the deed signing for the following week. The funds would be deposited into a new investment account I had opened specifically for this purpose, completely separated from any financial structure that could benefit my children in the future. On Thursday of that week, I received an unexpected call from Bella. Her voice sounded tense, but maintained that false sweetness she had always used with me in the past. Arthur, could we talk? I think there are many misunderstandings we could clear up if we converse like civilized adults. Of course, Bella, I am listening. I would prefer it to be in person. Could you come home for dinner? The kids want to see their grandfather, and honestly, this whole situation is affecting them a lot. The mention of Alice and Ethan was like a dagger straight to the heart. Throughout this crisis, I had tried not to think about how my decisions would affect my relationship with my grandchildren because I knew that thought could weaken my resolve. The children can visit me whenever they want, Bella, but discussions about the family situation I will handle directly with David and Christine. Arthur, please, David is destroyed. He has not eaten well since Friday. He does not sleep and is desperately looking for work. Do you not think he has already learned the lesson? What lesson exactly do you think he has learned, Bella? There was a pause before she answered as if she were choosing her words carefully. He has learned that he made incorrect decisions, that he should have spoken with you directly about his concerns instead of exploring other options. Exploring other options. The euphemism struck me as particularly offensive. Is that how you define document fraud and conspiracy to declare me incompetent? Arthur, those were informative inquiries that were misinterpreted. No one had real intentions to hurt you. Bella, do you realize I have complete documentation of all your plans? They were not misinterpretations, they were deliberate and calculated actions. Her tone changed abruptly, abandoning the feigned sweetness for something more direct and threatening. Look, Arthur, I understand you are upset, but you are destroying your own family for a misunderstanding. David is your only son, the father of your grandchildren, and the one who has dedicated years of his life to working in your company. Are you really going to throw it all overboard for this? I did not throw anything overboard, Bella. David made those decisions when he chose to betray me. And what about Alice and Ethan? Are you going to punish them too? They did nothing wrong. This time the emotional manipulation was so obvious, it almost caused me to laugh. My grandchildren will always be welcome in my house, but you will have to explain to them yourselves why their father decided to lie and steal from their grandfather. Bella hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Christine made her last mediation attempt. She arrived at my house on a Sunday afternoon, alone, with an expression of determination that reminded me of her mother Helen, when she had decided to tackle a difficult family problem. Dad, I have come to make a proposal. I am listening. David is willing to return every dollar he improperly used from the company. He can get a personal loan to cover the $2,750 plus interest if necessary. He is also willing to sign any legal document guaranteeing he will never again try to access your properties without your explicit consent. I sat in front of her, studying her face for signs of sincerity or manipulation. And in exchange for that, what does he expect? That you reconsider the severest consequences. He does not ask to get his job back at the company. He does not ask you to reverse the apartment sale. He only asks that you do not eliminate him completely from your will, and that you allow him to keep the family relationship with his children. Christine, you will also return the $800 monthly you have been receiving. Her expression hardened slightly. Dad, I never forged documents or planned anything fraudulent. My participation in family conversations was minimal, but you participated. You knew what David was planning and did not communicate it to me. That makes you an accomplice. Christine got up abruptly from the chair. You know what, Dad? Maybe David and Bella were right about you. You have become a bitter man who prefers to punish his family instead of resolving problems like an adult. Resolving problems like an adult? Are you referring to allowing my children to steal from me and then pretending nothing happened? I refer to recognizing that your controlling behavior pushed David to take desperate decisions. Her words confirmed something I had begun to suspect. None of my children had really understood the gravity of their actions. In their minds, they remained the victims of my controlling behavior, not the perpetrators of a family betrayal. Christine, you can go. And when you talk to David, tell him his proposal has been rejected. The consequences I established are definitive. Christine headed toward the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. Dad, someday you are going to regret this decision. When you are really old and need help, you will remember you rejected the only children you had. Perhaps I responded calmly, but I prefer to face old age alone, rather than surrounded by people who only see me as a source of income. After she left, I sat in my living room and reflected on the last 10 days of my life. I had lost my 2 children. I had irreversibly altered family dynamics, and I had guaranteed my grandchildren would grow up with a distorted version of these events. But for the first time in years, I felt completely free. 1 year later, while I write these lines from my new apartment in the historic center of Chicago, I can affirm that the decisions I have taken at this moment are the same ones my father would have taken